This video is brought to you by the number 5 and the letter G. And pretty soon, everything else will be too.
24/7, around the clock exposure, wherever you are, and your whole body. You never get away from it. And it seems from our studies that maybe your immune system can cope with for a time, but it will deteriorate. Then the irradiation will definitely damage cells at a deeper level, and the question is what will then happen?
They did not want us to give out this thing that was going to make people less stuck on their phones.
These are out of peer-reviewed papers, so these are not just hypochondriacs thinking that they're doing it. We're having real problems with this.
This is no longer a subject for debate when you look at PubMed and the peer-reviewed literature. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, microbes. So 5G is not a conversation about whether or not these biological effects exist. They clearly do.
There is scientifically evidence that is so strong that you can be certain that the standards used by the SCC to manage health effects are wrong.
You believe that someone in the room above you was using some kind of a weapon to attack your family in the hotel room below.
I do.
And that they specifically targeted your children in their beds.
Yes, I do.
Well, there's the kids. Got to have the kids in there.
It's optional.
We need to start measuring how much radiation are people being exposed to before we roll out 5G. There are 4 kinds of electromagnetic fields that we know are harmful to human health. So radio frequency radiation, magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and electric fields, okay? Our exposure, any given person, and all humans are affected by EMFs. What is our exposure in a day? It's not one cell phone. It's cell phones, it's multiple wireless networks, it's smart meters, it's cell towers. It's this sandwich, and it all adds up.
Could there be a cause that none of us have even considered yet?
Yes.
Sure.
Absolutely.
You're reporting on something that's invisible.
Like an invisible searchlight, right? You know what a searchlight looks like? So an invisible searchlight of radio waves going downrange. So it's this big when it starts, and at the end, it's the same size.
Were there moments where you had doubts about what you were hearing?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we've been doubting the story from day one, and that's part of our job. But on this story, with so many unknowns and so many questions unanswered, and just the bizarre nature of what's happened here, it was a daily occurrence. So we've been incredibly careful to check everything we can and to try to be clear with the audience about what we don't know.
Eventually, the weapon could be put to a wide array of uses, such as thwarting hostile attacks, dispersing mobs, and reinforcing security. For now, it remains just a prototype.
What does the badge signify?
This is my Diplomatic Security Service badge.
These are State Department and Commerce Department officials.
Put your hands on your hips and close your eyes.
And their stories are incredibly compelling. And their medical records are incredibly compelling.
Anyway, he goes on to say that the electric field in studies by Norbert Wiener, that would be the father of cybernetics back during World War II and the Cold War.
Right now, here's the thing. You are a brain in a vat. Then that vat is your skull.
Yes.
And everything you see, feel, hear, everything, all your senses are electrical signals. Everything. Everything.
Was arranged to provide a direct electrical driving of the brain. That's what this kind of stuff is based on. And he goes on to say that it's been found that indeed physiological effects can be induced in the manner by very weak electric fields if they're pulsed with a frequency near 0.5 hertz. The observed effects, which is just the ones they had for this particular patent, include ptosis of the eyelids, which means your eyelids close and flutter, relaxation, drowsiness, the feeling of pressure at a centered spot on the lower edge of your brow, seeing moving patterns of dark purple and greenish yellow when your eyes are closed, a tonic smile, a tense feeling in your stomach, sudden loose stool, and sexual excitement.
You refer to these people as victims. Is it possible that they're victims of their own imaginations? Has that been raised?
Well, I joined the Royal Navy in 1960, and I specialised in microwave warfare. Radar, obviously, which uses microwave, but they don't just teach you radar, they teach you all about microwaves and other uses. So I understood about microwave warfare and how it can damage people, how it can harm people. Microwaves then were used as weapons, as they are today. It is a perfect stealth weapon, and when governments don't like a group of people, for instance, the ladies who protest at Greenham Common in England about the American missile base they camped, they were microwaved. We microwaved Catholics in Northern Ireland to make them sick. It goes on all over the world. And it's a weapon that you don't know you're being targeted, because the dose is very, very low, which is actually more dangerous than a high dose. It's very, very low, and it may take a year or two, but you can cause neurological damage and cancers with low-level microwaves, and you can make all your opponents sick. It's a perfect weapon for a government.
How long have you guys been reporting this story?
I would say it's been about a year, maybe a little bit longer. We were attracted by the fact that this was a mystery that hasn't been solved, and the people who were actually victimized here had never been heard from directly.
I think the same thing has been done with mind control as a concept. There's been an expansive campaign to try and make everyone think that all that stuff is impossible, it's not real, it's science fiction, it's fantasy.
So there was some reporting that was done that claimed that this was mass hysteria. There are a lot of elements here that just discount the idea of this being mass hysteria. A dog can't get sick because he thinks somebody else is getting sick.
There were nonverbal children having symptoms as well.
I mean, we've not been told. We haven't been told how we work, okay? Let alone how everything else does.
Who aren't going to look around and...
They're not susceptible to mass hysteria.
You'd think.
Children and dogs.
Exactly.
Faster, better, more reliable internet. That's the promise of 5G technology, but there is also the peril. Health hazards associated with radio frequency that is higher also, and requires more transmitters and antennas.
Hypnosis doesn't really work. Neurolinguistic programming has supposedly been scientifically debunked. Subliminals don't really work either, even though they've spent decades upon decades refining and using that technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, this commercial is going to use subliminal advertising. Subliminal advertising.
The State Department sponsored treatment at the University of Pennsylvania, and they were all there in and out for the same period of time. Our understanding is that in the waiting room, they started calling each other themselves the Tinfoil Hat Club.
The Tinfoil Hat Club. What's the meaning of that? What's the joke?
It's the old trope of sort of the crazy guy who puts tinfoil on his head so the aliens can't beam, messages into his brain.
So it doesn't take much for this. This can be just put right into the television monitor. It can be put right into your VCR, your VHS tapes. I mean, computer programs, anything, computer monitors, whatever, right?
It's a gallows humor. These folks are really trying to grapple with what they're dealing with.
And so he wanted to warn people about it. And that's kind of what I get, the sense I get from this website of his that he had up at the time. This is no longer a current website, but back in the day he had this, and he said that depending on these frequencies, relaxation, drowsiness, sexual arousal, he knew he could cause all these things with this program. And he says that electric field pulses capable of exciting a sensory resonance can be generated by small insulated electrodes packed flat in the space of a credit card.
Everyone in your broadcast story says that they were attacked while they were serving in China, but you also spoke with people who were attacked in Cuba, including one woman who speaks on camera, and she's wearing a disguise.
You have asked us not to use your name. Why is that?
Well, I mean, this isn't something that any of us really want to be known for.
Now we're really being inundated with the concept of triggering. Let's see what Google says about the word trigger and what it means, since that's where millions upon millions of people get their information from. So let's see what Google says the word trigger means. And you can clearly see straight away that as a noun, trigger has one definition. It's a device that releases a spring or catch that sets off a mechanism, especially in order to fire a gun. Trigger, a noun.
She is the first victim from Cuba, a diplomat, to go on camera to tell her story.
There was an amazing pressure in my head, also pain, and it was almost paralyzing for a moment. I don't know if that was...
The way she describes the attack is very important because it matches so closely to some of the other stories we've heard.
And then you start,
Yeah,
it starts looking like a pattern.
yeah, correct. There's definitely a pattern.
But then you have trigger as a verb, which is to cause an event or situation to happen, to cause a device to function, to precipitate, to provoke, to activate. They're activating something.
You've been concerned about keeping your identity out of this. So I wonder, why did you sit down to speak with us at all?
And then look at this last definition, which is the longest one on here. Especially if something read, seen, or heard distress someone, typically as a result of arousing feelings or memories associated with a particular traumatic experience. Quote, she started crying and told me that my news had really triggered her. Don't you think that's interesting, though, that it's not only that trigger is a verb, but they specifically, the longest explanation, the longest definition has to do with how news is an example of how to trigger someone. Do you see that?
I really want our story to be told. I want America to know what happened to their diplomats serving overseas. And I want people who were injured in these events to come forward if they haven't come forward before, because treatment does help with the symptoms, and it's not something that you should have to live with and suffer through alone. So it's important for everyone to hear this.
Now let's take a look at my dictionary from 1941 and look up the word trigger. Oh look, it's a noun. It was not a verb at that time. There's no verb form of the word trigger in this book. Meanwhile, can it really be a coincidence that the same year you had stuff like this coming out is the same year you have it listed that the word trigger started being used in this specific way as a verb to denote the initiation of something or having something be provoked?
It's like think of it as like a bunch of circuits, and there's some like circuits that are broken, and we can like fix those circuits, substitute for those circuits.
And so a specific frequency will go through this?
Yeah, just
specific in that is the process figuring out how much or how little has to be, how much these areas of the brain have to be juiced up?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of work to do.
And if you read the first page again, this patent is based on years worth of other patents. So it isn't like he just came up with this off the spot. He's got 10 of his own patents based on doing this kind of stuff. People just have no idea. We're walking around bathed in so much electromagnetic radiation right now, background. Human beings have never been exposed to the level that humanity is currently being exposed to in our modern technological age. And we're carrying cell phones in our pockets. We're sitting in front of our computer monitors. We're sitting in front of our television sets. And people just don't have any idea the myriad uses that these things can be put to, all the stuff it can do. People are just blissfully ignorant. They don't know. And I personally don't want to go through life blissfully ignorant. I'd like to be informed.
Everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound.